welcome to How to Talk When Everyone is Screaming, Standing Up for Life in a Divided Society. My name is Michael DeMay. I'm here from Human Life of Washington, the state affiliate of National Right to Life, the oldest pro-life organization in America. Who among us has had that experience where you start a conversation with somebody and it just immediately turns into an argument? It seems like our world has gotten increasingly contentious this day and age. Everything we talk about, war, politics, human rights and dignity, values that we hold, integrity, philosophy of life, all of this is just a constant argument no matter where we go. And to an extent, that's inevitable, and in a way almost should be that way, because these are all serious issues that we're talking about up here. It's going to get people fired up. It should get people fired up. And to an extent, that's helpful. It helps to drive forward the conversation. It helps to make it so that no matter what's happening, people are actually getting invested in what's happening here. But the problem is that instead of conversing about these things, screaming is much more in vogue. We live in a culture where people are losing lifelong friendships over whether or not the 8th Star Wars movie was any good. And no, that's not an exaggeration. I truly wish it was. But what do we do in this? What do we do when people's friendships are ending over a movie? How do we talk about something as difficult to speak on as abortion? How do we reach people, and how do we bring them truth and love and healing when we live in such a harsh society? Well, it begins with reminding ourselves and then reminding the people that we're talking to of one very critical detail, that we all want a better world. With the exception of a handful of psychopaths, nobody wakes up in the morning thinking, how can I make the world a worse place to live? No, nobody's thinking that. The people that we're talking to, as misguided as they may be, like us, simply want a better world. What we differ on is how we think we need to get there, what we need to do in order to make that better world. So we need to be able to have this conversation with them, because somebody has to be wrong here. This is the most basic principle of logic, non-contradiction. If I'm right about this topic, then the wrong answer can't be right also. Somebody has to be right here, somebody has to be wrong here, and we have to have this conversation. This is a fight that we simply can't avoid. It's everywhere around us. It's everywhere in our society. It affects everything. So we have to be able to have that conversation. So two people walk into a room, and both of them want rights for children. Both of them want children to grow up in loving homes. Both of them want women to be protected from violence. Both of them want justice for people in terrible, terrible circumstances. But the difference between these two people is that one of them believes that abortion furthers the cause of all of those issues that I just talked about, and one of them believes and understands correctly that abortion in fact harms all of those. So we need to have that conversation. We need to be able to help people realize, I appreciate where you're coming from. I know you want justice. I know you want the right thing to be done, and that's why I'm having this conversation with you, is because what you're promoting, as well-intentioned as it is, isn't actually achieving that end, and I'm going to explain to you why. And we do that by reaching out to them with charity, with compassion, and with love. We do that by recognizing that they too are our brothers and sisters, and that they need help to recognize the truth so that they can turn all that great energy that they have, all that desire for a better world, towards actually making that better world. So how do we do that? Well, first of all, we need to understand that every pro-abortion argument you will ever hear is going to come down to these 5 basic arguments. And to an extent, the 6th argument, though that one doesn't really count, we'll talk about that later. But every pro-abortion argument you will ever hear comes down to these. It sounds like a bold claim to make, but I'm going to prove it to you by the end of this. But before we even get into that, we have to talk about what your most important tool is in any conversation: listening. The people that we're talking to have their own stories. They have reasons for believing what they believe. They have things that brought them to this point. And very often, they have a great deal of pain and anxiety, often from personal experience. Perhaps they're just worrying that something like this could happen to a friend or a loved one or to them, which is severe enough as it is. But perhaps this has happened to a friend, to a loved one, to them, who has found themselves in an unplanned pregnancy for whatever reason. and they're now dealing with the fallout of that, or did deal with the fallout of that, and perhaps that's why they're so entrenched in this position, because they already made that decision. They already had the abortion. So we need to listen to people in these circumstances. We need to hear their pain and anxiety, or else we're never going to be able to have a conversation with them. We also have to listen because we need to respond to their particular question. Like I said, everybody has their own reasons for believing what they believe, their own background that brought them to this point. And so perhaps their question is going to be about, well, what happens when a mother has conceived a child in rape? What are we going to do in that situation? And if you start answering about something like population control, you've ended that conversation. You need to be able to respond to their particular concern. And you need to listen so that you can recognize the common themes. Like I said, every pro-abortion argument you will ever hear comes down to those 5 basic arguments, but that's not always obvious. And so if you're going to fall back on your basic training, you need to be able to listen enough to hear, all right, I haven't heard that quite like that before, but that sounds like it's argument 4, so I don't know exactly how to respond to this, but I can give you the basic response based on that similarity. So the first argument, these are probably the most basic ones, the lies that dehumanize the baby. Well, it's not a baby. It's just a clump of tissue. It's not human, or it's not a person yet. All of these you'll hear. The personhood one, I think, is the most common these days. People have kind of pivoted away from talking about the humanity question for reasons that we'll get to in a minute. But personhood you hear very, very frequently. So first of all, the science behind the humanity of the child, because for all that people like to claim that pro-life people don't have science on their side, that it's just a matter of religion or personal belief, no, science is absolutely on our side here, folks. The child has a heartbeat at 18 to 21 days. They have brain waves at 6 weeks. And we are certain that they feel pain at 20 weeks, but it's probably even younger than that. Now, the earliest possible abortion that can be done is using the chemical RU486, and that can't be done until about 5 to 6 weeks, meaning that every abortion is stopping a beating heart and silencing a budding mind. At an even more basic level, simply what is it to be human in the first place? Well, it means that you have human parents, that you have human DNA. It means that you are alive and self-developing, and that you are a unique, distinct human organism. Now, unique and distinct, if I were to cut off my arm, besides the fact that that would be a terrible life choice to make, I wouldn't be making a new human. I would be cutting off a part of an existing human. But the child in the womb isn't a part of the mother. The child in the womb is entirely genetically distinct from the mother, and moreover, it's not a matter of an automobile where you gradually assemble it based on all the different parts. No, it's a matter of growth, not construction. Because from the very moment of conception, all of the parts that make up a human being are present in that child. From the very moment of conception. Your hair color, your eye color, before either of those have even developed. Your potential height, where you're going to gain weight if you eat too much, fingerprints, every single part of your unique human blueprint is there from the very moment of conception. So by every conceivable scientific definition, the child in the womb is human. That we can't argue that point, which is why a lot of the terminology is shifting away from that towards talking about personhood. And when we get to talking about personhood, we have to make a very, very strong point here that human rights must be universal, or else they are arbitrary. If we concede, for any reason, at any moment, that any person who is human somehow isn't a person, we've already lost. Human rights are gone, they're a thing of the past, they're out the window, get rid of them, we can't talk about them anymore. Because if we make there be any criterion for qualifies for human rights beyond be human, we're done. You've created a false dichotomy between human and person. And that means that you're denying that human rights even exist, because that means that I could say, well, I don't think that women should have rights, so sure, they're human, but they're not really people. That's an arbitrary distinction made by someone in power. Or I could say that about any minority group. I could say, the Nazis said this about the Jews. It's an arbitrary distinction made by people in power. We can't allow that arbitrary distinction to be made, because if we do, then no one is safe. As Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. put it so eloquently, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. If I want to advance my rights, I have to advance your rights. It's as simple as that. And speaking of rights, let's talk about the rights and needs of the woman. Because this is, I think, probably the most common one that you will hear overall, is coming down to caring for the woman. And you will usually hear this as, a woman has a right to control her own body. Well, wait, hold on a second. I think we just established it's not her own body. So right there you've got a point that you can make. But if you take away abortion, you're taking away women's liberation. That's very common. And I find that frankly condescending towards women, but women, let me know if you think that that's a little condescending. Women need abortion to protect their rights. Again, very condescending. Now, it's important to remember in these circumstances that the woman's problems actually are real. You know, if a woman is in an unplanned pregnancy and she's worried about her future, perhaps she has very legitimate reason for that. Maybe she's at a college and she's in danger of being thrown out of that college or losing her scholarships because of an unplanned pregnancy. Maybe she's going to be thrown off of her sports team. It could potentially derail a career for her. It could be a case where the boyfriend has threatened to break up with her if she doesn't have the abortion. But by the way, there's a very good chance he'll break up with her anyway. It could be any number of these reasons. And these are all real hard situations that they're in. And we don't want to minimize that because we have to take care of her too. We care about her life, her future, her livelihood too. But abortion isn't going to fix her problems. Abortion is a bad response to these very real problems that she's suffering through. It doesn't respect her dignity as a mother. It kills the child instead of fixing her problems, and it doesn't give any options that respect her intelligence, her strength. You know, think about this. You know, which sounds more empowering, which sounds more pro-woman to say, hey, you're in a hard situation, and I understand that, but you know what? I believe in your capacity to overcome this. I believe in your capacity to achieve your dreams, to move forward, and to have a great life, even though you've been thrown this curveball. And you know what? I'm going to be here to help you to achieve those goals and to make it possible for you to move those barriers that might be thrown up out of the way. And I'm not going to stand by and let somebody, take away your job, whatever it is. I'm going to help you fight that so that you can hold on to your dreams, hold on to your plans for the future. Or to say, life has thrown you a curveball and you can't handle that. Better just take care of it. Which of those sounds more pro-woman? And even if that wasn't the case, science has shown us time and time again that abortion isn't healthy for the woman. It's not safe. It's deadly for the baby, of course, but it's not safe for her either. Behind me you see the book Complications, which looks at 650 worldwide studies examining this, the award-winning film Hush, and of course, Smart Women's Healthcare and our website, Human Life of Washington. You can find even more resources for this on National Right to Life, and all of these resources that show you all the many, many different ways that abortion is harmful to women. We're just going to talk about a few of them here tonight. And for any of you just joining us on the live stream, the notes to this talk, in case you missed the opening, can be found on the Human Life of Washington website, which is humanlifewa.org. Find it under Get Involved, and you can catch up. But just a few of the physical damages that can be done by abortion. Breast cancer. A lot of studies have shown that there's as much as a 5 times risk of breast cancer, especially if it's the first child who is aborted. RU486, the chemical abortion, bleeding and vomiting, infertility, miscarriages, infections, all of those are huge risks. And little foreshadowing of the psychological damage that we're about to get into, the women aren't told that they're very likely to find their dead baby in the toilet. How about surgical injuries, uterine perforation, menstrual disturbance, inflamed ovaries, cervical injuries, future pregnancies, very often premature, disabled, birth defects, miscarriages are increasingly common, and infertility is more than double the risk. And of course, there have been over 200 deaths to safe, legal abortion since '73. But as horrifying as all of that is, I find the psychological trauma to be even more disturbing. There are many, many studies that I could point to, and again, all of those resources that I listed off will have even more examples of this. But one that particularly stood out to me was a big macro study that was done in the United Kingdom, which looked at 22 studies in 6 different countries of 877,181 women. And what those studies revealed is that women who were post-abortive were 81% more likely to suffer mental health problems. 81%. That's anxiety, depression, personal relationship disorders, drug and alcohol abuse, sexual dysfunction, much higher risk of suicide. All of these problems. Can you imagine any other product on the market right now where there was an 81% chance of suffering mental health problems from it? You'd be strung up for having that out there. It's insane. How can we possibly justify this? By the way, that same study and all these other studies it could point to found that women who delivered those unplanned pregnancies were significantly less likely to experience all those same mental health problems by leaps and bounds. Is abortion really safe for women? I don't think so. Women deserve to be affirmed in their strength, not shunned because they're pregnant. And by the way, most women don't even want abortion. That's when you'll hear a lot, well, women want abortion. No, most don't. Even Planned Parenthood's own think tank, the Guttmacher Institute, revealed this. Their own studies found that the reason that most women gave for having an abortion is that they felt that they had no other options. No other options. Well, what are those other options? Because while Planned Parenthood claims to care about women, there are, 650 clinics that you can go to? By the way, 650 that you have to pay for. But there are over 3,000 free crisis pregnancy clinics in this country. Actual health centers that are going to give women help and support. And those are just the free ones. That's not even getting into all the adoption agencies. That's not getting into all the housing agencies on top of that. That's not getting into the places where it's a clinic that, okay, maybe there's some monetary cost there, just like Planned Parenthood. That's just 3,000 free crisis pregnancy clinics. Who's really demonstrating that they're giving women options here? I love this quote by Patricia Heaton. I'm horrified that pro-choicers are horrified by actual choices. Doesn't that just hit the nail on the head? And this one from New Wave Feminists I also love. When our liberation costs innocent lives, it's merely oppression redistributed. Again, injustice everywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And speaking of justice and society, let's talk about the social arguments. Every child a wanted child. Big slogan of Planned Parenthood for decades. Overpopulation, another big one. Who's going to take care of all these children? Oh, well, poor women can't be expected to take care of children. Now, these all sound very high-minded, and in fairness to the people saying them, they probably actually intend this in a positive, helpful fashion, because they believe these lies. They've been told these lies for years. They have no reason to doubt them. And so they think that they're being helpful to society here. But let's strip away the veneer. Let's take away the veil and look at what these arguments actually are, because they don't demonstrate society's need for abortion. They demonstrate our failure as a society to help the vulnerable amongst us. Every child a wanted child. Well, okay, so if I have my son Reggie over here, Reggie's 10, Reggie has just put a hole in my car with a crowbar, and I look at Reggie and I say, you know what, Reggie, you're a little snot. I'm tired of you being around. I don't want you anymore, Reggie. Okay, did that do anything to diminish Reggie's worth as a human being? I mean, it showed that I'm a terrible father, but it did absolutely nothing to Reggie's value, because our value judgments don't change other people's value. That's insanity to believe that, and the moment you start believing that, well, you start killing people in your society. That's just what happens. Overpopulation, that'd be too heavy of a topic, too complex of a topic to cover in its entirety here. That'd be a whole different talk. If you want more on that, check out Stephen Mosher. He's got a lot. I think it's the Population Research Institute, I believe. The links are in the notes, which again, for those of you joining us on the live stream coming in late, you can find these notes to this talk under the Defenders tab for Get Involved at humanlifewa.org. Our website, Human Life of Washington, that's humanlifewa.org. But overpopulation has been debunked many times over, bottom line. With our population increasing from 4.5 billion to 7.5 billion in the last 30-ish years, we've cut extreme poverty in half. We now have more access to resources and a higher standard of living across the globe than we have ever known in the whole of human history. We have more access to resources. Resources aren't the problem. Number of people aren't the problem. It's access that is killing us. So maybe we should focus on fixing that instead of just killing the poor. Well, who's going to take care of all these children? How about the millions of parents who would adopt? The millions of parents out there just waiting to adopt. And how about the millions of mothers who, when they are empowered with real choices, with real options, choose instead to raise the child, as so many do, as we've seen? Poor women can't be expected to take care of their children. Well, isn't that condescending? Isn't that so condescending? To all of my friends growing up who grew up in very poor circumstances, but their parents raised them, their parents loved them, their parents took care of them. A lot of them actually had very good home lives, a lot healthier home lives than I've seen in some wealthier communities, because poor people, like anybody else, sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. They're still going to find ways to make it work for their kids. And if you're concerned that they're not finding those ways, well, maybe you should spend your money providing those ways of helping those people. Maybe you should work on that instead of just killing the poor people instead of helping them. We as pro-lifers believe in human progress. We believe in our capacity to overcome challenges, to empower the poor, the vulnerable, and the oppressed, not kill them. Questions 4. Now we get into question 4 and 5 here. When you hit questions 4 and 5, it's usually because they've already been exposed to 1 through 3. They're coming in heavy because they just want to crush you right out of the gate, or you've had a conversation, you've exposed them to 1 through 3, and your arguments are starting to make sense. And so now they're responding with arguments 4 and 5 because those are the heavier ones. Those are the ones that in their mind are going to be harder to refute. They're not, but that's how it comes across. And so if you hit this point in the conversation, give yourself a little pat on the back mentally because you're making progress. Argument 4, it says questions of safety and regulation, but it really just comes down to one question. If you take away abortions, well, won't you just drive women to have dangerous back alley abortions? And that sounds scary because I don't know about you, but for me that conjures up the image of some creepy dude behind a dumpster with a coat hanger. That's horrifying. I never want a woman to go anywhere near somebody like that. But as scary as this question is, as scary as this whole argument of the back alley abortions is, it's complete garbage. It is a total fabrication. So here's kind of the breakdown of what this argument claims. They tell you that before Roe v. Wade, there were 5,000 to 10,000 women dying in back alley abortions every year. 5,000 to 10,000 women. And that before Roe v. Wade, there were 1 million illegal abortions a year. And that now, thanks to safe and legal abortions, those dangerous and unsafe abortions are a thing of the past. Well, I don't know if there are any MASH fans in here, but I've got a great quote from Sherman T. Potter for that one. Horse hockey, it's absolute garbage. Here's the reality of those claims. It wasn't 5,000 to 10,000 dead. It was at most 200 to 300. And again, that's very much at the outside. The year before Roe v. Wade happened and abortion was legalized, it didn't even break triple digits. And it wasn't 1 million illegal abortions. It was 100,000 at most in the worst years. And as to that question of safe and legal abortions, guess what? As far as surgical abortions go, the methodology hasn't changed at all. Back alley abortions, again, conjures up this image of some dude with a coat hanger, but that's not what was happening most of the time. Vast majority of the time, what was happening is you went into the back alley behind a hospital, they let you in the back door, and they gave you a surgical abortion inside the hospital. And then they took you back out the back door. As far as the methodology of surgical abortion goes, the only thing that has changed is that now it's legal. They've put the shingle in the front window. That is all that is different. How do we know all of this? Well, besides a mountain of CDC data, people coming forward from inside the abortion industry who have become pro-lifers, our biggest ace in the hole here is a repentant conspirator by the name of Dr. Bernard Nathanson. Now, back in the day, they called this guy the abortion king. He was one of the founders of NARAL, all right? The group that got Planned Parenthood and all these other groups to exist by getting abortion legalized, the big driving force behind Roe v. Wade, all this. Founder of NARAL, all right? He ran the largest and most active abortion facility in the United States and was personally responsible for 75,000 abortions. 75,000 abortions. And then he saw an ultrasound. And that changed everything. Because all of a sudden, he couldn't deny the humanity of the child, and he realized what he had done 75,000 times, what he had promoted to be done all throughout the country. And he dedicated the rest of his life to undoing this tragedy, to undoing what he had been a part of. He spent all of his last days coming out and saying, this is what we did. This is how we brought this about. And what he admitted, among many other things, was that he and his co-conspirators deliberately fabricated all of those falsehoods that I just told you about and more. They created the myth of the nightmarish back alley abortion from the ether because they knew that America would never legalize abortion unless people had a boogeyman, something to be afraid of more than they were afraid of abortion. And so they lied. You can find all kinds of material from him online. You can find his book. You can find his YouTube videos. But I especially like this quote of his. We fed the public a line of deceit, dishonesty, and fabrication of statistics and figures. We sensationalized the effects of illegal abortions. We unashamedly lied. And yet our statements were quoted by the media as though they had been written in law. They will tell you that women want abortions, but as we've already discussed, statistically most don't. And when they legalized abortion, they promised us, don't worry, legalizing this is not going to drive the abortion numbers up. But that's so false. They went up 1,500%. That's not a zero change in the number there, folks, 1,500%. And they will tell you, well, okay, the numbers might have gone up, but at least there are fewer abortion-related deaths, and that's because we legalized it. No, it's because we have antibiotics. That's what's bringing those numbers down. When you've got the malfeasance of one of these abortionists like Kermit Gosnell, who people are dying under this man's knife, it's antibiotics that are saving those women from the malfeasance of guys like Kermit Gosnell. That's what's saving lives. And it's the fact that we're building up a culture of life in this country, that we have right-to-know laws in some states, which bring the abortion numbers down by forcing the industry to actually present women with all of their options. That's what's changing hearts and minds. And then we get to the hard cases, argument 5. And I'll tell you, I have never had a lengthy conversation about abortion that didn't ultimately come to these. Not once in years and years of doing this. What about the cases of rape and incest? What if the mother's life is in jeopardy? What if there is a fetal abnormality? And friends, I submit to you, those are good questions, all right? I think that we sometimes forget as pro-lifers that the people who are asking these questions of us aren't asking these questions because they're monsters or because they're just horrifically incapable of listening to logic. No, they're asking us these questions because they're afraid for their fellow human beings. They're asking us these questions because they care about their fellow human beings, and from their perspective, they don't understand how abortion is harmful, or at least not harmful to the extent that we're talking about. And so from that perspective, with the limited information they have, these are perfectly valid questions, and they deserve good answers. And as we talked about earlier, these questions are coming from a place of fear. With any question about this, you have to understand the pain, the anxiety, the personal story of the person you're talking to, but especially with these hard cases. Because the last thing you want to do in a situation where you're talking to somebody about abortion and they bring up one of these questions, what if it's a woman who's been raped? The last thing you want to do is treat that lightly because, one, that's a serious question in and of itself and it should be addressed with full gravitas. And two, it might be the person you're talking to or their loved one or their son or their daughter, their best friend. Or they might be afraid that this is going to happen because one of their friends was just raped, and now they're worried that that friend might be pregnant. They might, all these things might be true. It might be somebody in their circumstances. So we have to respect that. We have to unite with these people in that moment. Make it clear we care about the pain and the suffering of the people in these circumstances, all of the people in these circumstances. We know it's horrific, and we want the best outcome. And that's why we are being pro-life here, is because the best outcome is life. Because abortion is just going to take an already terrible situation and make it worse. So let's take I believe the hardest one first, rape and incest. And again, what has happened here is absolutely horrific. The woman, the young girl, deserves justice. But abortion isn't justice. It's just more pain. All those statistics that I quoted to you earlier, that 81% more likely to suffer mental health trauma all those physical risks, those are all exactly the same for her. It's not like the abortion is magically different just because it's a different circumstance leading up to it. Actually, those risks are worse as far as the psychology goes because she's already suffered a terrible trauma. And there's comorbidity when it comes to psychological damage. Very often, if somebody has already suffered one psychological trauma and then they suffer a second one, those two work together to make them collectively worse. So her risk has skyrocketed. There are only a couple studies that have been done explicitly on women who have been the victims of rape and incest in the context of this question. But what those studies revealed is that the majority of women who aborted after the case of rape and incest reported that it was actually a worse trauma from the abortion than from the rape. Why? Because the first was an act of violence against her, an innocent. But the second was an act of violence against an innocent, her child, and she had control in that situation. And so many of them came to grips with the first act of violence. They coped with that. But the second one continues to haunt them. As for the hope, we are presenting a loving, healing solution here. Because the women who made that heroic choice to carry that child to term, who received the support and love of their communities to carry that child to term, or who just, by some extraordinary act of the will, powered through on their own, whatever the case, they said that it helped them cope with the trauma. And think about this. They brought life out of a horrific and violent situation. They confronted an act of violence against them which had stripped away their control, and they took back control and used it to bring life into the world. What could be more empowering than that? Having the child gave them back control of their lives. And of those interviewed who had carried the child to term, whether they gave the child up for adoption or raised the child, not a single one in these studies reported wishing that she had aborted. Not a single one. People deserve to know this. People who are in these circumstances deserve to know the hope and the truth and the love that we can offer them. And they deserve to have it in their communities. What about when the mother's life is in peril? Now, I want to make a point here very clearly to not just the people we're talking to, but to pro-lifers, because it astonishes me how many pro-lifers don't know this one. We are in favor of the woman seeking emergency medical treatment. We want her life to be preserved, and it astonishes me how many people don't know this. We care about her, and we want her to be treated fully. Now, sometimes, and there's just no way around this in some circumstances, the child will die as a result of the medical treatment that the mother receives. But that is not an abortion. An abortion is a deliberate act to kill. But if the child dies as a result of legitimate medical treatment, as an unfortunate side to that, that's what's called a double effect. It's entirely morally distinct. It's tragic, it is incredibly horrific, and we absolutely need to be there for this mother, and for the father perhaps, in this time of mourning. Because that's a horrific situation, but it's not an abortion. Also, if a woman's life is in danger, an abortion, as we've discussed, is a dangerous and an invasive procedure. If her life's in danger, those risks are going to skyrocket. And much like with that 81% with the case of rape, it's very likely going to be higher because of comorbidity, very likely going to be higher here too. So we need to seek solutions that respect the life and dignity of both people. And again, National Right to Life, Equal Rights Institute, Human Life of Washington, Smart Women's Healthcare, these websites have a lot more information on the specifics of these medical cases. I'm not a scientist, I'm not a doctor, but those websites will help you find even more resources on that, and you can find the links to that just by searching them online or by looking through the document that goes along with this. For those of you just joining the stream, you can find that at Human Life of Washington's website, which is humanlifewa.org. Under the tab Get Involved, scroll down and look under Defenders, and you will find this PDF there. Fetal abnormality, when the child is almost certain to die or when the child is very likely to have a disability. So, talking more broadly, if the child is likely to have a disability, say the child has been diagnosed with Down syndrome, well, one, they misdiagnose that all the time. But two, even if the child has a disability, that child still has a chance to live a very fulfilling life. We don't have the right to make a value judgment about somebody else's life and to say, well, that person can't have a happy life. Why not? I know lots of people who have Down syndrome who have fantastic lives. A lot of them have a better life than I do. We don't have the right to make that call. And we can't discriminate against people just because they have a disability. But even in the cases of the fetal abnormality, when the child is almost certain to die immediately after birth, if they even make it that far, again, we don't have the right to make value judgments of other people's lives. We don't have the right to close the door on hope. We can't discriminate against them. And there is hope, however slight, because advances in medicine, specifically in utero surgery, have given us options that we've never had before. We have ways of saving lives that would have been science fiction 10, 20 years ago. We can correct malformations, which again would have been science fiction to fix 10, 20 years ago. Both the parents and the child deserve this chance. But even if there's nothing that can be done, even if the worst happens, even if the child dies, God forbid, the parents deserve a chance to hold their child. Think of the closure that can bring. They don't have to spend the rest of their lives wondering, what if I'd taken a chance on hope? What if I'd gone for that Hail Mary pass? They know they left it all on the table and held nothing back. And in this time of great grief and mourning for them, as they have suffered through something that no parent should ever have to experience, that's going to bring hope and closure. And the child has a right to be loved, held, named for those few precious moments. Now, the sixth argument is really a non-argument. It's ad hominem, which essentially means against the man, against the speaker. And these are the arguments that are just about you. You're a man. You can't have an opinion on this. Well, you're not old enough. You're too old to have babies. Well, how many babies have you adopted today? You're just a religious nut job. Well, the trick to all of these is that none of them actually mean anything. That it is a logical fallacy to attack the speaker and not the argument. If I'm a compulsive liar and I say 2 + 2 = 4, guess what? 2 + 2 = 4. That's the truth. It doesn't matter that I'm a compulsive liar. The ad hominem argument is a logical fallacy, so congrats. They've run out of real arguments. So maintain composure. Sometimes, especially if the ad hominem is just something that's being used to couch an actual argument, just ignore the ad hominem and talk about their actual argument. And if you have to address the ad hominem, because sometimes that's appropriate, just be real polite, real gentle, and point out the fact that the ad hominem argument doesn't undermine or change anything that you've said. Use that example of the compulsive liar and the 2 + 2 = 4, or make one up yourself. Just point out this, even if everything you accuse me of being is correct, that has no bearing on the scientific reality, the moral reality of the situation. It has no bearing on the statistics. You can look these up if you don't believe me. Here's the link. Have that on hand. So take the emotional boost from knowing you've made progress, because usually if they're hitting the point where they're hitting you with ad hominem, it's because they've run out of real arguments and they don't know what else to do. Remember, listening is your most powerful tool. Speak with love, speak with compassion. Know your essential fetal facts. Remember that 18 to 21 days. Remember that 6 weeks to the brain waves, 18 to 21 days for the heartbeat. Remember these things. Remember the basics of those 5 arguments, and know the law in your area. If you want to follow up on the law in your area, Human Life of Washington, you can go to our website. We have links to reputable groups from whom you can find, what law is currently on the books, who's currently backing this, that, or the other thing when it comes to life issues. And as to actually communicating all of this to people, we follow the 60-30-10 rule, because this is the age of television. People do not want to buckle down for a long conversation with you. They want a soundbite by and large. Now, maybe if you give them a good soundbite, they'll sit down for a longer conversation. But for the most part, they just want you to be bright, be brief, be gone. 60-30-10. Only 10% of what we talk about with people, only 10% that they're going to pick up on are our words. That's it. The other 90% of what they're going to get from us is how we look and how we sound. So 60% of your message is look. What's your appearance? What's your demeanor? Are you smiling? You should be, 9 times out of 10, because we're talking about babies and mothers and hope and love and warm hugs and cuddles, okay? Smile, for crying out loud. We're talking about hope. Let it show on your face. And is your body language reflecting the appropriate emotions here? Because that's going to be something that they're really picking up on. If you're talking about hope and all the things that we can do for the mother and all the wonderful options that she has, be smiling. And if they bring up that hard case, is your tone reflecting that too? Is your body language reflecting that too as you talk about how terrible it is, how tragic it is that a mother has been placed in that situation, and how much we just need to love her and help her and provide real options for her. And then as you get into talking about the hope that you can bring to her, is your tone coming back up? Is your body language shifting back to that positive, back to that smile? I'm exaggerating here for the sake of making a point, but these are the sorts of things that we need to be keeping in mind as we do this. And be calm. You know, as I said at the start, we live in a very hostile, angry culture right now. People are fighting over the stupidest little things, so be calm. Don't rise to the bait. If you catch yourself getting riled up, bring it back down. Maintain open body language. Don't fold your arms. Don't lean forward, because this is an aggressive pose, all right? This is the pose that says, I'm about to get into a fight with you right now. That's it. We're going to throw down, you and me. And it's not only sending that message to the other person, it's also sending that message to us, because we're animals. Our biology tells us that if we're getting into an aggressive pose, it's because we're about to throw down with somebody. So lean back. Unfold your arms. Maintain an open posture. If you feel yourself leaning forward, lean back. If they start leaning forward, lean back. Don't fall over. But lean back. Keep open body language. Dress well, but dress simply. Have something that you'll be comfortable in, but that is still going to make you look like somebody who's actually respectable to talk to. 30% of your message is sound. We've already talked about this a little bit, but it's your tone. It's your inflection. You know, do you have a big voice or a small voice? If you've got a big, bombastic voice and the person you're talking to looks rather mousy, dial it back a notch, please. And if the person you're talking to is hard of hearing and you've got a very soft, quiet voice, make sure you're bringing that up. Learn to project. And intensity. There's a very subtle difference that comes in between, yeah, we're talking about hope here. We're talking about all the things that can be done, and we really think that abortion is wrong. You know, again, I'm exaggerating here. But how is your intensity? Because if somebody feels like they're being yelled at, they're going to start getting combative. And if they get combative, they're going to be listening less and arguing more, and you've lost the conversation. You need to be having a conversation with people. You need to be maintaining that tone where it's, you know, we're just two flawed people working towards a solution. We are cooperating as fellow human travelers of this life, trying to find out what's going to be best for people, to help them, to love them, to bring them to compassion, to bring them to healing. That's what we're working on, okay? Can't we just sit down and have a conversation here like friends? Your inflection can invite somebody to do that, even if you don't say that explicitly. Now, there are times for saying that explicitly, but your inflection will say it for you if you don't have a natural way of bringing that up. And do not display frustration, please. I know you are going to hear some stupid things. And I mean that with all charity, but some of the things that people say to you are just insane. A lot of times it's very well intentioned. You just have to maintain that composure. Don't get riled up. Don't display frustration. Make the conscious decision to be relaxed and practice this. I don't just mean sit down with your friends and family and practice, like, okay, you pretend to be the pro-abortion person and I'm going to debate you. That's great. That's fantastic practice. But practice this on things that don't matter. For example, if your buddy Clyde is of the opinion that Star Wars 8 was a good movie and you know he's wrong, because he is, you need to be able to look at Clyde and say, you know what, Clyde, let's have a conversation about that. And as you're talking with Clyde, don't get angry at Clyde. Don't lean forward towards Clyde. Be laid back. Have an open, calm conversation with Clyde. And if you can do that with him about something that doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things, it'll make it that much easier for you to do it when it does matter. And finally, we talk about the words we say, because we have only a brief moment to speak, and in that moment, only 10% of what you're going to say is going to be heard. So choose your words very well. And we're going to go into a segment here that I call Say, Don't Say. We really want to avoid the C word. We don't want to say choice. Now, there are some exceptions to this that I'll cover in a second, but the broad reason that we don't want to say choice is because that's their word now. Like, yes, technically, as we've seen tonight, we're the ones who are genuinely in favor of choice for women, but they own that word. They've trademarked it. They put it up on all their posters. They own what it means. They have changed what it means, and it subconsciously to everybody says abortion. That is what they have made it mean, so we can't use it. Instead, we say decisions, alternatives. My favorite is options, because that's a shorthand word that people commonly use in parlance, and it's a good substitute for choice. But courses of action to help her. I mean, English is a flexible language. Be creative. Grab a thesaurus. Go crazy. Not too crazy. There are exceptions to this. I've said it a couple times in the talk tonight when I shouldn't have, but there's a local group here in Spokane called My Choice, which is affiliated with Life Services, and they're a fantastic actual pregnancy clinic that is here to help women. They're great. I love referring people to them. They do wonderful work, and they're called My Choice. And actually, a lot of crisis pregnancy clinics are called things like My Choice. It appeals to people. So there are circumstances to use it, and in a conversation, if this is really looking like it's going to be contentious and there are other more important things to talk about, it's okay to let it slide. But as a general rule, we want to emphasize options, and we don't want to use their terminology, because when we use their words, we give them power. The one we really don't want to use is the F word. We don't want to use that F word either, but we don't want to use fetus. We don't use fetus because even though, yes, okay, fetus does mean something like little one if you look at the technical etymology, no one cares about etymology in context, okay? What matters here is that, again, they own this word. As far as they are concerned, fetus means not human, so we can't use it. We have to say unborn baby, preborn child, unborn child, baby, he, she. Anything we can do to humanize the child is to our advantage. And on that note, we don't say it. I know I've been guilty of this one, but we don't say it. We say he, we say she. She has the advantage of playing the feminism angle. A lot of people are talking about this from a perspective of women's rights. Okay, we'll talk about women's rights. Let's talk about the rights of the women in the womb. The advantage of he goes back to argument one, because he has a Y chromosome, and he with a Y chromosome is not part of the woman's body. There's no possible way you could make that argument, so there are advantages to both. Now, up here it says pregnant woman. Obviously we can say pregnant woman, obviously we can say woman, but what we're trying to get away from is saying pregnant woman versus her fetus. We're trying to get away from that whole mindset. So as much as possible, we are trying to emphasize motherhood. We want to talk about the woman as a mother, and we want to emphasize that because it's a mother making decisions for her child. Next one here. We don't say termination of pregnancy, removal of the contents of the womb, or any of the other weird euphemisms they use. We don't use those. We say abortion, because let's not have any confusion about what we're talking about here. We're talking about abortion. And again, if they really want to emphasize termination of pregnancy, you can't change what words they're going to use, and it's usually not worth the effort to bring it up, but make sure that you're emphasizing it in your terminology. Abortion. Let's be clear here. We don't say doctor or physician. We don't say clinic or hospital. We don't say reproductive health care, family planning centers, because all of those things are legitimate medical care. They help people. They do no harm. That's their point, their actual medicine. But abortion is the opposite of medicine. It is the opposite of do no harm. It is explicitly killing somebody. You can't get more anti-medicine than abortion. So we say abortionist, we say abortion facility, and we say it's the abortion industry. It is big, it is powerful, and they make a lot of money. It is very manufactured. So we say abortion industry, abortion facility, abortionist. Now, a caveat here, we don't say abortion mill, and we don't say abortuary. And I've been guilty of this. I've used both of those many times. But the reason we don't say those is because we sound like nut jobs to them. Now, again, I think that there's a certain argument to be made for, well, they reveal a certain measure of truth about what's happening here. Sure, they do. But if that truth is getting in the way of you having a conversation with this person, if that truth is getting in the way of them seeing the truth, then it's not helpful, and we don't talk about it here. Maybe in another context, but not here. This one, I've heard a lot of people debate about this one, but anti-abortion, we try to avoid using that one. And the reason that we try to avoid that is because anti is scary to Americans for the same reason that ban and prohibition, especially prohibition, are scary to Americans. We're all about freedom and liberty, and something that says anti makes us sound like the bad guys. It makes us sound like we're the ones who are coming in here and you've got to go follow those rules and get in your box and stay over there judgmental. No. We don't want anti. We don't want ban. We don't want prohibit. Those are bad words. They scare people. We're pro-life. That's putting a positive spin on what we're doing here. That's saying, hey, we're advocating for something. That sounds much more inviting, and it gets kind of more of a, yeah, rah, rah, let's get behind this. This is a cause that we can get behind, especially to people in my generation, big on those causes. And the other part of it, too, is that we're more than just against abortion. We're for the life of the child. We're also for the life of the mother. We're also for the mothers and fathers and grandfathers and friends and people in the abortion industry who are post-abortive. And we want them to get healing and to come to a place of compassion where they can put that behind them. We want people like Dr. Bernard Nathanson to come to a place of healing and forgiveness. So we're pro-life. It's more than just being against abortion. We don't say pro-choice. We already covered why. We don't use the C word. Now, we say pro-abortion instead, but this is one of those ones where it's best to have a prepared response, because a lot of times people will like to say that they will be in favor of abortion, but they will say, well, you know, I'm pro-choice. I'm not really for abortion. I just think that a woman should still have the option. And to that, we sort of need to have a prepared response. We need to say, well, Charlene, I respect that you don't want women to be having abortions, and I respect that you care about their needs, and I respect that you care about their dignity. But here's why I'm uncomfortable saying pro-choice myself, and it's because, you know, I've seen the damaging effects that abortion has on women. You know, did you know that 81% of women, and they found this at looking at 877,000 women over 6 different countries, 22 different studies, they looked at this, plus a whole bunch of others. 81% of women suffer mental health trauma because of an abortion. And that's not even getting into the really hard cases. That's just your average woman on the street. 81%. I don't think that this is a healthy choice for women, and so I can't, in good conscience, call it choice. I respect your reasoning, but I can't follow it. And see, right there, we have gently presented the truth to them in a way that is respecting where they're coming from, respecting them as a person, but it's not budging either. It's very much a case of turning the other cheek. You're not running, but you're also not getting combative. You're holding your ground firmly and compassionately. We don't say prohibit abortion. Again, prohibit is a scary word. We say we're here to protect. That puts a positive spin on it, doesn't it? We're here to protect unborn children, babies, children from abortion, and we're here to protect them. We don't say feticide because we don't say fetus. Feticide is dehumanizing. No, this is the unborn child, the preborn victim of violence. And we don't say liberal abortion laws either because, well, for one, we don't want to get into politics, because let me tell you, the moment you have derailed the conversation by talking about Trump, you are not getting it back. But we don't want to talk politics. And for two, it's not even really what fits into classic liberal thought. Because, you know, classic liberal thought, if you look back through the ages, has been about advancing the rights of the downtrodden, and how could you get more downtrodden than the helpless child in the womb? So it's not liberal. No, these are extreme abortion-on-demand laws. That's what's being pushed right now, are these laws that say abortion without restriction, whenever you want it, for any reason. That's what they're pushing. That's not liberal, that's psychotic. Now, this one sticks in a lot of people's craw, so let me explain here. We don't say murder. And the reason that we don't say murder is because, one, it's technically not true. And I want you to let this horrifying fact sit in for a second. Murder is a legal distinction. Murder says, in the eyes of the law, you have killed someone unlawfully. But in the eyes of the law in this country, there's nothing illegal about abortion. So murder is untrue, technically. And that's scary, and that should keep us all up at night. But the other reason, the even more important reason why we don't say murder, is because we have to remember the person that we're talking to. Because that person we're talking to might have had a daughter. You know, let's say it's a gentleman in his 40s. Maybe his teenage daughter was raped, and she had an abortion, and he doesn't know it perhaps, but he needs to deal with the pain of losing a grandchild. and his daughter needs to deal with the pain not just of the rape, but of the abortion that followed the rape, which is in all likelihood going to haunt her for even longer. Both of them need healing here, but the moment you say murder to that man, you have said your little girl, your precious little girl, is a murderer, and that conversation is over. And you have cut that father and his daughter off from the healing that they desperately need. So that's the scenario we always have to keep in mind, because the person we are talking to could be post-abortive, or it could be their friend, or it could be a loved one. And if we say murder, we have cut that person off from healing. If we have to use a word, we say killing. Honestly, because of my awareness of just how many people there are who are post-abortive in the country, depending on what age group you're looking at, and depending on what area you're in, it could be as much as a third of the people that you're talking to. I mean, it's a huge number. Because of that, I try to avoid addressing that directly until I've really built up a rapport with somebody, and when I have to use a word, I say killing. Or I find a slightly wordier way of saying the same thing, but I definitely don't say murder. And I've been guilty of this. I used to do this, and it really backfired. So take it from me. We don't say permissive abortion laws because they're not permissive, they're completely unprotective. Permission sounds like you're getting an opportunity to do something positive, but this isn't positive. And it's not reproductive rights advocates and supporters. That's not what they're supporting. They're supporting abortion. That's what they're promoting. And when they say, well, you're just here to ban abortion, prohibit abortion. No, let's put a positive spin on this. We're here to protect unborn children and their mothers from violence. And we are here to pass protective pro-life laws that are going to make sure that if there's an unplanned pregnancy, whatever the circumstances behind that, the woman and the child are both going to have their rights protected under the law and have every opportunity to have a better life in the future. So that's the overview. Now we're going to get into a little bit of the more practice type of it. So here's the omnibus argument, all right? You're an awful religious expletive. You think you can force a woman who may have been raped to go through with a pregnancy when she can't support a child. If you take away her right to an abortion, you drive her to a dangerous back alley abortion. You monster. Boo, hiss. Evil pro-lifers. Okay, first of all, we've all heard this before, right? Second of all, of the 5 arguments plus kind of the bonus 6th one, which ones do you see up there? Which ones do you see? 6. Absolutely 6. There's a whole lot of 6 throughout that. Very charged 6. What else? What else do we see up there? Come on, throw out an answer here. See, I'm seeing 5 here. Because of rape, that's a hard case. Right. I'm seeing force a woman to support a child. Let's see here, that's 3, because it's saying she can't. Back alley abortions, right to an abortion, that's going back to 2. And of course, throughout, implicit the dehumanization of the child. This is the everything argument. And you will get these. Don't panic, you've trained for this. It looks scary, it's not nearly as scary as it looks. Because you know how to answer every question up there, right? We've just gone over this. So how would we go about approaching this? Frankly, you could start, depending on the circumstances, with any one of these. You always have to read the room and see how the person's coming at you. Like if you have a really, really good rapport with somebody and you've already talked about ad hominem earlier in the conversation, it might be appropriate to open with that, though this is very rare. Usually you want to ignore the ad hominem because that's just a red herring, but there are circumstances in which you might say, hey, Bob, we were talking about this, man, and, we talked about how ad hominem isn't really an argument, so let's dial it back, let's hear your actual argument, because I want to answer you, but we have to have a conversation here. That can be appropriate. Most of the time you just kind of want to let that wash off your back and go forward with the actual arguments. And of all of those up there, the one that I think is the best to start with, 99 times out of 100, is rape. Because that's the hard case. That's the scary one. And frankly, that's the one that they probably care the most about. And it very well might be a real case, or one they know of, or a terrifying hypothetical to them. Terrifying hypothetical, probably the most common, but it could be any of them. So we want to tackle that one first. Also, tackling the hard case first pretty much answers all the other questions at the same time. Because if you're talking about the damage that the abortion will do to the woman, even in the case of rape, you're, by extension, also talking about argument 2, because you're just talking about the woman in general. And in the course of this, you'll probably also be talking about the social side of things, because you're saying, like, yeah, this woman is in a horrible situation, and we need to help her, actually help her as a society. And if we're just trying to sweep this under the rug and pretend that it didn't happen, that's us failing her. So that's argument 3. Argument 4, if you're talking about, well, abortion's dangerous in general, well, that can kind of get into a little bit of the back alley abortion, because you can be like, yeah, this is how dangerous the abortion is. And by the way, I know you said back alley abortions and all that, but did you know that the surgical abortions they use now are exactly the same as they were using back then? So this is a springboard to all of them. And of course, implicit to all of this, you can be talking about the child. Next up, you're going to hear this one mostly with college-age kids who have had just enough philosophy training to be dangerous. Morality is relative. Why should I care about your definition of human life? Or there is no objective truth. Well, so first of all, there is no objective truth. Here's a really easy hole to poke in relativism. Let's see here. Relativism is the belief that all of these things are largely unknowable, and we're sure about that. I feel like there should be a joke soundtrack playing here. But as to the broader one, I like to open this one with saying something like, well, thank you for sharing your belief system with me. See, what's fun about this is, as far as they're concerned going into this conversation, we are the crazy person who is moved entirely by his or her own belief system, and that's why we're up here. We don't have any science behind us. We're just here because of our belief system. So with this first sentence, we've flipped that on its head. Thank you for sharing your belief system with me. But I must admit, don't point, that's aggressive. Bad, Michael. But I must admit that I am leery about saying that we should have laws about human rights based on personal opinion instead of scientific reality. You have just flipped that entire perspective around. Now we're the ones who are making laws based purely on empirical science, and they're the ones who are making decisions based on personal beliefs. It's sort of fun to watch the gears kind of turning after you say this one, I must admit. Never be cruel in saying these things. Just have an earnest conversation. But you can have a little laugh inside if you want. If we do away with the science of human life, doesn't that open the door to a whole host of human rights abuses? Yeah. We have to draw the line somewhere with these things. This kind of goes back to argument 1. We have to be able to make a firm distinction about what it is to be human in order to defend human rights. And the only one that we can say with any definitiveness is the scientific definition of humanity. So if we're making laws about how we treat humans, it has to be scientific. Always bring it back to that, and feel free to propose a couple nightmare scenarios to them. Just say, I feel like if we say that, these people are human by every scientific definition, but we're not going to let them have rights, we're not going to consider them people, wouldn't that kind of mean that, like, if we got tired of dealing with our elderly or something like that, that we could just, start mandating that some of them get killed, or make it so that their children could just decide, well, it's time for grandpa to shuffle off this mortal coil type of thing. By the way, that's happening. And that should frighten us too. The second practice question here, isn't it cruel to force a teenager or a young college woman to live with the shame of an unwanted pregnancy? Well, this one kind of bounces back to question 2, doesn't it? This is talking about the woman. And there's another one that it's really easy to kind of turn on its head, because we can say, hey, I thought we were trying to live in a post-shame culture. If they're pushing that these days, we might as well use that to our advantage. They're talking about, oh no, live with no shame. Don't feel bad about anything you do. Okay, fine. Who's going to make this woman feel ashamed? I'm not. She's in a circumstance that she didn't plan on, but you know what? I believe in her ability to work through this. Maybe instead of shaming her like this is the Victorian era or something, let's give her some real options that actually respect her strength, her capability. She is woman, hear her roar. Let's help push that forward here. Again, turn it around. We're the ones in favor of women's rights here. That's not what they expect. This third one I've seen this one making the rounds of the internet a lot lately. It's called the burning fertility clinic question. And you see it a few different ways. It's not always a fertility clinic, but this is basically what it comes down to. If there was a fire, you had a choice between saving 1,000 frozen embryos or one 9-month-old infant who's in there and is screaming, who would you save? And this is one of those ones that their mindset behind this is, we are going to prove that you care more about the lives of the baby that's out of the womb than the ones that aren't in the womb. So, you don't really care about them. You don't really think that they're equal. Well, okay, we do, and we can answer this. But how we want to open this one is to say, now, that's a good question. It's a little bit more involved to answer it than it is to ask it. So are you willing to listen to are you willing to listen here? Because I can't answer you. It's just going to take me a minute. Are you comfortable with that? You know, always make sure that you feel like that you sound like you're accommodating them, that you're going out of your way for them, because people are a lot more likely to be receptive to you if they feel grateful to you in some fashion. Like, oh, this guy's taking time out of his day to talk to me about this. Okay. It calms the conversation down and creates more of a sense of rapport between you, and it adds to the social dynamic, really. So if they say yes, you can say, well, okay, so first of all, here's the short answer. We would save the 9-month-old, probably. Actually, pretty much certainly, we would save the 9-month-old. Here's why. Because performing triage doesn't diminish the value of the individual human life. So if I'm a combat medic, you know, I was researching recently about the Battle of Saipan in World War II. Horrific battle. And there was a point where a Japanese Yoshai charge, this was in the Pacific Theater, of course, had overrun the American position. They had to evacuate the field hospital, and the people that they couldn't evacuate who were injured were being bayoneted to death behind them. So picture that you're a combat medic in that situation, okay? You've got a choice of who you can save. You can only carry so many people. You've got this guy over here who can sort of walk, but I'm going to need to put my hand around his shoulder to help him. And this guy over here who's kind of in the same boat, okay, so I can help these two guys sort of walk. We can maybe get out of here alive. But there are those 10 guys over there who are so badly injured that they can't be moved. I can't get them out. I don't have time to come back. I don't have stretcher bearers to come back. I can get these two guys and that's it. Does that mean that I don't care about the lives of those men? Does that mean that their lives matter any less than the two guys I'm getting out? Of course not. But it's triage. You're saving the people that you can reasonably save. That doesn't diminish the value of those other lives. And if you don't want to use that example, you know, sometimes the people that you're talking to aren't going to be comfortable with a military example, and they're going to go off on this whole thing about the military and whatnot. If that's not appropriate, maybe use a situation where it's a hospital that's burning down and a similar situation there, and you can get the two guys out that you can kind of hobble with, or the 10 comatose patients. You're going to get the two guys that you can hobble with. It's a question of survival odds as well. You know, the frozen embryos, yes, they're human children. They're just as valuable, but there's a very low chance that they will survive even without the fire. Most of them die. Whereas with that one baby, that is 100% chance that that baby is going to live if you get that baby out, the conscious 9-month-old child, as opposed to the frozen children. So, in that respect, again, you're just performing triage. Also, this argument itself, the question that they brought to you in the first place, isn't actually that good of an analogy for abortion. Actually, it's just a terrible analogy for abortion, because there's a massive moral distinction between choosing who we can save, prioritizing, and choosing, I'm going to kill that person. You know, a better example, and this one isn't even perfect, would be if it's like, okay, I've got to save this child from a building, and there's a comatose guy over there, 10 comatose guys, and I'm going to shoot them all in the head, and then get the baby out. You know, that'd be closer, and even that wouldn't quite get there. You can make choices to save lives without devaluing other lives. And again, that's a very involved question. If you want to see more on that, you can find more with Equal Rights Institute. They did some very good material on that. And there's some other links as well to this and other questions, which you can find for those of you just joining in the stream by going to Human Life of Washington, which is at humanlifewa.org. Going into the Get Involved tab, scroll down to the Defenders, and you will find the rundown of this whole talk. You can, in even greater detail than I've gone into here, as well as a bunch of links to even further details. Now the hardest one, and this is probably the scariest question that you will ever get until you know how to answer it. And even then, it's scary because this is a scary, awful situation. What if it's an 11-year-old girl who's the victim of incest? Isn't it cruel to force her to carry the baby? And again, folks, that's a good question. And we should answer that respectfully and honestly. That question deserves a good answer. But basically that answer isn't that dissimilar to what we talked about earlier with the question of rape. Are we really going to subject that poor child to even more psychological and physical trauma? So we already have the tremendous health risks of abortion, especially psychological health risks. We're talking about that 81%. It's already going to be worse in all likelihood in the case of a rape. And for an 11-year-old, I don't even want to think about how much higher those risks are of the psychological damage, of the physical damage. Just talking about the physical damage, by the fact that this is a first pregnancy and that she's so young, the surgical abortion is massively more dangerous. And as for that chemical abortion, again, all the same risks as above, amplified by her youth, and there's a good chance it's going to permanently damage her endocrine system. And then there's this, even further than that, there's the legal aspect to it, frankly. The justice aspect to it, really. Because in cases of rape in general, and especially in cases of incest, abortion is used to cover that up all the time. You can see the David DeLayden videos, with the undercover videos that they did with Planned Parenthood. I hope I pronounced his name right. But pimps take their young girls that they're trafficking, because that's what's happening there. You know, we say pimp, which almost sort of legitimizes it. It's like, no, they're sex traffickers. Right. They take their girls in to get them abortions, and that covers up what they're doing. And in cases of rape, it covers up what happened. And in cases of incest especially, it covers up what happened. We are not saying this child should raise the baby at all. That'd be a terrible, terrible environment. Absolutely not saying that. But we should not, cannot subject her to an even greater trauma just because we're not comfortable with what happened to her. There's no easy solution to this. This is a horrible situation. There's no easy solution. And if we try for that easy solution, all we're going to do is hurt this poor little girl even more than she has already been hurt, and that is wrong. Always, 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 abortion is a bad solution to real problems. So whenever you're talking about this, acknowledge those situations. Love people in those situations. Respect those real hardships that they are undergoing. And then in all love and charity and compassion for their sake, out of care and concern for them, invite them to see that in those situations, no matter how tragic, how terrible, abortion is just going to make it worse. Because the purpose of the pro-life movement is not to impose guilt over past decisions. We are here to impart wisdom over future decisions. We are here to be the voice of hope, truth, and possibility to a world that desperately, desperately needs us. And for those of you who are looking for other ways to get involved in this ministry, other ways to give back and help people, Human Life of Washington has launched our Defenders program. It is intended to be a place where you can hear about trainings like this, and not just ones that we're putting on, but if there's a webinar that Equal Rights Institute or Healing the Culture or one of these other groups is putting on, we try to let you know about those too. Anything that's coming down the pike as far as an event, if 40 Days for Life is happening, if there's ministry happening at a church or at a local nonprofit that's looking to do something, we want to let you know about that too and update you on upcoming legislation. It is not an obligation to do anything. It is an invitation to do something. So with all of our emails that we send out, all the events that we send out, our policy is if you can make it to this one, great. We'll love to see you there. If you can't make it to this one, that's fine. We'll see you at the next one. If you're interested in being put on the Human Life Defenders mailing list, you can email me at michael@humanlifewa.org. That is Michael, Michael, at humanlifewa.org. And those of you who are physically present, I've got a sign-up sheet up here, so don't worry about that. You can also reach us through Facebook or through our website, humanlifewa.org. And if you want the transcript to this and even more details of all that I've talked about here tonight, You can find it at humanlifewa.org. That's humanlifewa.org under Get Involved Defenders. Thank you all so much for coming out here tonight. Thank you, Pastor Ken, for so generously hosting us, providing this building for our use here. And folks, it's a hard, scary conversation to have. It's a hard world to have that conversation in. But people need us, and the truth is right here in front of us. And with just a little practice, we can have these conversations with people. You don't always have to have all the answers. Have these basics that we talked about here tonight. Practice these techniques that I've given you for having these conversations with people. If they catch you up short, fall back on your basics and know where to point them for additional information. Be okay with humbly saying, here's the basic answer that I can give you right now, and here's where you can go for additional information. You can go to these websites, you can look up these people, you can look up these talks, they're going to know more about it. And be willing to invite them into that moment, and they'll respect you more for the humility. So don't be afraid to have this conversation. The more you do it, the easier it's going to get, and they need you to have this conversation. The person you're talking to needs you to bring them to the truth. Probably won't happen in one conversation, but if you plant that seed, you never know how much good you might do. Thank you all very much, and have a wonderful evening. We good? We good back there?